You may not notice it at first, but pay attention. Most of your emotional reactions happen before you have time to think. A message arrives and tension rises. A thought about the future appears, and your chest tightens. Something does not go as planned, and irritation takes over. It feels personal, immediate, honest. But ask yourself this: when did you choose that reaction? You did not. It arrived on its own, like a reflex, and yet it dictates your mood, your words, your decisions. This is not because you are weak. It is because emotions are fast, and the untrained mind mistakes speed for truth. When an emotion appears, it demands authority. It says, act now, worry now, defend now. And most people obey without question. Not because the emotion is right, but because it feels urgent. What you call suffering often begins here, in the moment where reaction replaces judgment. Consider this carefully. Two people face the same event. One collapses internally. The other remains steady. The difference is not strength or luck. It is the space between what happens and how they respond. Most pain lives in that space when it is left unmanaged. This is not about suppressing emotion or pretending to be calm. It is about realizing that much of what feels uncontrollable is only unexamined. If you feel exhausted by your own reactions, anxious without knowing exactly why, overwhelmed by thoughts that seem to run on their own, this is not a flaw in your character. It is a signal that your inner authority has been handed over too quickly. And before anything can change, that truth must be seen clearly. The emotional illusion of control. Anxiety often disguises itself as responsibility. It whispers that if you worry enough, anticipate every possibility, rehearse every outcome, you might somehow stay ahead of pain. It feels productive, almost noble. But look closely at what anxiety actually does. It does not prepare you for the future. It drags the future into the present and forces you to live it emotionally before it arrives. The future remains untouched, indifferent to your worry, while your present moment is slowly consumed. Anger follows a similar logic, but it looks outward instead of forward. Anger arises when reality refuses to align with the image you had in your mind. Someone behaves differently than expected. An outcome fails to appear. An injustice remains unresolved. Anger is the mind's demand that the world should obey its preferences. It is not simply emotion, it is protest. And like anxiety, it carries the illusion that emotional intensity equals influence. Here is the critical point most people miss. Emotions surge not when danger is real, but when the mind believes it has lost control over something it thought it possessed. When you truly have no illusion of control, fear is often brief and practical. When you believe you should control outcomes, people, timing, or certainty, every deviation feels like a threat. Emotional chaos is born at that exact moment, not from events themselves, but from the collapse of an internal illusion. This is why emotional reactions feel so personal and so convincing. They are rooted in attachment to outcomes, attachment to certainty, attachment to being right, safe, or validated. When those attachments are challenged, the mind reacts as if something essential has been taken away, yet nothing was stolen. What was lost was an assumption that was never guaranteed. Epictetus addressed this directly in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 1, where he explained that some things are within our control and others are not. Our opinions, impulses, desires, and aversions belong to us. Our body, reputation, possessions, and external events do not. Emotional suffering begins the moment this boundary is crossed internally. Anxiety tries to control time. Anger tries to control others. Frustration tries to control results. Each emotion feels urgent because it is defending territory that was never yours to govern. Notice how exhausting this becomes. You argue with reality in your head. You replay conversations. You rehearse outcomes. You carry emotional tension as if it might influence events that have already happened or have not yet arrived. This is not strength, it is resistance without leverage. And resistance without leverage always turns inward as suffering. This does not mean emotions are mistakes. They are signals. They point directly to where you have confused influence with authority. When you feel overwhelmed, it is rarely because life demands too much. It is because you are demanding control where none exists. The emotion is not the enemy. The belief behind it is. Once this is seen clearly, something begins to shift. Not relief, not calm yet, but understanding. And understanding is the first moment where reaction loosens its grip. The illusion of control cannot survive scrutiny. And when it weakens, emotional intensity no longer needs to shout. Why emotions feel honest, but aren't. Emotions feel honest because they arrive without asking permission. They rise in the body before the mind has time to organize itself. The heart accelerates, the muscles tighten, the breath shortens. This physical immediacy convinces you that what you feel must be true. The mind translates intensity into certainty. If it feels this strong, it must mean something important is happening. And so emotion is granted authority, not because it is wise, but because it is loud. This is where most people quietly surrender their judgment. They do not decide to trust emotion. They assume it deserves trust. Emotional certainty feels clean and decisive compared to the slow work of reasoning. Fear says danger, anger says injustice, anxiety says something bad is coming. Each one offers a simple story, delivered quickly, without nuance. The problem is not that these stories exist. The problem is that they are accepted without examination. Stoic thinkers understood this long before modern psychology named it. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, paragraph 47, that if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. That sentence is not poetic comfort. It is a diagnosis. Emotion does not arise from events directly. It arises from interpretation. And interpretations can be wrong. Emotions feel honest because they report how something appears, not how it is. They are reactions to impressions. When the mind receives an impression, emotion reacts instantly, long before reason has tested it. This made sense when survival depended on speed. But in modern life, this same mechanism creates suffering where no immediate threat exists. The body reacts as if danger were present, while reason has not yet spoken. This is why trusting emotion blindly is so dangerous. When emotion is mistaken for truth, reaction becomes action. Words are spoken, decisions are made, relationships are damaged, all in service of a feeling that was never verified. Emotional honesty is not the same as factual accuracy. An emotion can be sincere and still be wrong. Notice how often emotions contradict each other. Fear one day, confidence the next. Desire now, regret later. If emotions were reliable judges, they would be consistent. They are not. They shift with sleep, hunger, memory, expectation. To hand them authority over your life is to accept instability as a guide. This does not mean emotions should be ignored or suppressed. Suppression only creates tension and eventual explosion. The Stoic position is more demanding and more respectful. Emotion is allowed to appear, but it is not allowed to rule. Epictetus explained this clearly in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, Chapter 18, when he reminded his students that impressions themselves are not troubling, but the judgments we add to them are. The moment you believe the impression without examination, you suffer. What changes when this is understood is subtle but decisive. You stop asking how you feel as a final authority, and you begin asking why you feel this way. That single question creates distance. In that distance, reason enters. Not to argue with emotion, but to place it in context. Emotion becomes information, not instruction. This is the turning point. When you no longer assume that intensity equals truth, emotional chaos begins to lose its grip. Reactions slow. The mind regains its position. And for the first time, you realize that honesty does not belong to emotion. It belongs to reason that has learned to listen without obeying. The moment Stoicism draws the line. There is a precise moment where suffering either deepens or dissolves. It is the moment the mind decides what it has authority over. Stoicism does not begin with endurance or discipline. It begins with a boundary, a mental line that once crossed unconsciously turns life into a constant internal struggle. Once respected, it restores order almost immediately. The Stoics called this boundary the dichotomy of control, not as an abstract principle but as a practical rule for sanity. Some things are up to you, others are not. Your judgments, intentions, values, and choices belong to you. Outcomes, timing, other people's actions, reputations, and chance do not. The mistake most people make is not ignorance of this idea, but emotional refusal to accept it. The mind knows the distinction, but the emotions resist it. When this line is ignored, suffering multiplies. You replay conversations trying to change what was said. You worry about outcomes that are still forming. You carry resentment toward people who will never become who you want them to be. Each of these moments is the mind stepping into territory it cannot govern, then punishing itself for failing to control it. Emotional pain grows not because life is cruel, but because authority has been misassigned. Epictetus was uncompromising on this point. In Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 1, he warned that when you treat what is not in your control as if it were, you become anxious, resentful, and disturbed. This is not moral judgment. It is psychological consequence. The mind was never built to manage the uncontrollable. When forced to do so, it fractures under the weight. Before this line is drawn, emotional suffering feels personal and endless. After it is drawn, something changes. The same events occur. The same uncertainty exists. But the inner response becomes quieter. You no longer argue with facts. You no longer demand guarantees from life. You begin to notice that much of what exhausted you was not effort, but resistance. This is why the dichotomy of control is not philosophy, it is mental hygiene. Just as the body becomes sick when boundaries are violated, the mind becomes unstable when it tries to dominate what lies beyond it. Respecting this line does not make you passive. It makes you precise. Energy is no longer wasted on imaginary authority. It is redirected toward judgment, character, and response. Consider how this applies in real moments. Someone criticizes you. Before the line, you try to control their opinion emotionally. You feel attacked, defensive, diminished. After the line, their opinion remains external. You examine your own conduct instead. If correction is needed, you adjust. If not, you move on. The pain dissolves because authority was returned to its rightful place. The same applies to uncertainty. Before the line, the future becomes an emotional battlefield. After the line, the future becomes preparation without obsession. You act where you can. You accept where you cannot. Anxiety loses its fuel because it was feeding on imagined control. This is not indifference, it is discipline. It is the decision to suffer only where suffering is unavoidable and never where it is optional. Once this boundary is respected, emotional reactions no longer dominate by default. They are observed, classified, and answered. This is the moment Stoicism draws the line. Not to limit you, but to free you from a struggle you were never meant to win. And once the mind experiences this clarity, it begins to crave order over chaos, judgment over reaction, sovereignty over emotional noise. Acceptance of fate without resignation. Acceptance of fate is often misunderstood because it is confused with surrender. Many hear it and imagine weakness, passivity, or the quiet admission that effort no longer matters. This misunderstanding keeps people locked in resistance long after resistance has become useless. The Stoics never taught acceptance as defeat. They taught it as alignment with reality, the moment where energy stops being wasted and begins to serve reason. Resistance feels active, but it is often only emotional movement without direction. When something unwanted happens, the mind immediately argues with it. This should not have happened. This is unfair. This should be different. These thoughts create tension, not solutions. Reality does not respond. It remains unchanged. The argument continues internally, draining clarity and strength. Acceptance ends that argument, not by approving what happened, but by recognizing that what has happened already exists. Seneca addressed this directly in Letters from Seneca, Letter 107, where he warned that the mind suffers more from imagining calamities than from enduring them. He understood that fighting facts internally multiplies pain. Acceptance is the decision to stop adding a second layer of suffering to the first. The event may still be difficult. The mind no longer needs to be. Acceptance of fate does not mean you stop acting. It means you stop demanding that action erase uncertainty. You do what is within your power without insisting on guarantees. You speak when speech is right. You prepare where preparation is possible. And when outcomes escape your reach, you do not turn that lack of control into self-punishment. This is where acceptance becomes strength. When you no longer fight reality emotionally, reason regains its full range. You see options you missed while angry. You make cleaner decisions when fear no longer crowds the mind. You conserve energy that was previously spent resisting what could not be changed. Fate becomes something you move with, not something you exhaust yourself opposing. There is a quiet discipline here that is often overlooked. Accepting fate requires honesty. It requires admitting where your control truly ends. This can feel threatening at first. The ego prefers the illusion of influence to the humility of limits. But humility in this sense is not humiliation. It is accuracy, and accuracy is power. Marcus Aurelius returned to this theme repeatedly. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 4, paragraph 49, he reminded himself to love whatever happens to him, because it was woven into his destiny. This was not blind optimism. It was recognition that resisting what has already occurred fractures the mind, while acceptance preserves it. Once acceptance replaces resistance, emotional chaos loses its footing. Anger softens because it no longer demands the impossible. Anxiety quiets because it no longer insists on certainty. What remains is effort without desperation, action without panic, and responsibility without resentment. Acceptance of fate is not the end of effort. It is the beginning of intelligent effort. It clears the internal battlefield so reason can lead without interference. And when reason leads, the mind no longer feels at war with life. It stands within it, steady and alert. Reason as anchor, not suppression. Reason is often misunderstood as suppression. Many believe that to live rationally means to silence emotion, to harden the self, to become distant from experience. That belief alone keeps people trapped in emotional extremes. They assume the only alternative to chaos is numbness. Stoicism offers a far more demanding and humane position. Reason is not meant to erase emotion. It is meant to govern it. Emotion arises automatically. Reason does not. Emotion reacts. Reason reflects. When reason is absent, emotion fills the vacuum and takes command. Not because it is qualified, but because someone must decide. The goal is not to prevent emotion from appearing. The goal is to prevent it from ruling by default. This is where many fail quietly. They believe that noticing emotion means obeying it. If they feel anger, they speak from anger. If they feel fear, they retreat. If they feel urgency, they rush. They confuse awareness with submission. Stoic discipline begins the moment this confusion ends. Marcus Aurelius addressed this with clarity in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 5, paragraph 33, when he reminded himself not to be carried away by appearances, but to pause and allow reason to examine what is actually occurring. That pause is everything. It is the space where authority shifts. Emotion is allowed to report. Reason decides how much weight it carries. Reason acts as an anchor, not a muzzle. It grounds the mind when emotional currents try to pull it off course. When fear arises, reason asks what is actually threatened. When anger appears, reason asks what expectation has been violated. When anxiety persists, Reason asks what control is being falsely assumed. These questions do not suppress emotion, they contextualize it. Without this anchor, emotions stack upon each other. Fear feeds anxiety. Anxiety feeds avoidance. Avoidance feeds guilt. Guilt feeds self-judgment. The cycle feels endless because no stabilizing force interrupts it. Reason interrupts not by force, but by clarity. Epictetus was explicit about this in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, Chapter 23, where he explained that freedom is not the absence of disturbance, but the ability to respond to impressions in accordance with reason. Emotional maturity is not emotional silence. It is delayed authority. Emotion may speak immediately. Reason speaks last. This delay is not hesitation. It is discipline. It is the refusal to let the loudest voice win. Over time, something subtle happens. Emotions lose their urgency, not because they disappear, but because they are no longer rewarded with instant obedience. The mind learns that reaction is optional. This is why reason must be trained, not assumed. Left unused, it weakens. Used consistently, it becomes steady. You begin to feel emotion without being swallowed by it. You notice intensity without confusing it for truth. You respond instead of react. What emerges is not coldness, but balance. You still care. You still feel. But your feelings no longer drag your character behind them. Reason holds the center. Emotion orbits, no longer colliding with every decision. This is the role reason was always meant to play, not as an enemy of feeling, but as its guide. And when reason resumes this role, emotional chaos begins to organize itself, not through force, but through order. Practical internal shift, real-life application. The real test of everything you have heard so far does not happen in reflection. It happens in the moment. Something touches a nerve, a message that feels dismissive, an outcome that slips beyond reach, a silence where reassurance was expected. This is where philosophy either becomes practice or collapses into theory. The reaction is immediate, a tightening in the chest, a rush of interpretation. The mind announces a verdict before evidence is examined. Disrespect, failure, loss of control. This is the instant most people lose themselves, not because the situation is overwhelming, but because judgment is surrendered too quickly. Here is where the internal shift begins, not with effort, but with interruption. You notice the reaction as it forms, not to stop it, but to recognize it. This is an impression, not a conclusion. That recognition alone creates space, and in that space, choice quietly returns. Instead of asking how you feel, you ask what is actually happening. Instead of defending against a story, you examine facts. What is within your control right now? Your words, your interpretation, your next action. What is not? The other person's intent, the outcome, the timing. This classification happens internally, almost silently. Yet it changes everything. The emotion does not disappear. It settles. It no longer needs to shout because it is no longer in charge. Reason steps forward, not with force, but with clarity. You respond in proportion, not in panic. You speak deliberately or choose silence. You act where action is possible and release what is not. This shift feels subtle, almost anticlimactic. There is no surge of confidence or dramatic calm. There is steadiness, a sense that the moment is no longer controlling you. That is how real control returns, quietly, through judgment, not dominance. Marcus Aurelius described this discipline repeatedly, reminding himself to strip events of the stories added by emotion and see them as they are. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 11, paragraph 18, he emphasized the power of the mind to step back from impressions and refuse unnecessary disturbance. This is not abstraction. It is training for moments exactly like these. With practice, this internal sequence becomes familiar. Reaction appears. Pause follows. Authority is reassigned. Response emerges. What once felt automatic becomes deliberate. You begin to trust this process because it works under pressure, not just in calm reflection. Control returns the moment judgment becomes conscious. Not control over life, but control over how life is met. And that is the only control that has ever mattered. The quiet result: inner sovereignty. What changes first is not your life, but the tone of your inner world. The same demands remain. The same uncertainties appear. People still disappoint. Plans still shift. Outcomes still escape prediction. Yet something essential is different. There is less urgency inside, fewer emotional spikes. The mind no longer races to defend itself at every turn. This is the quiet result of inner sovereignty. It does not announce itself with confidence or optimism. It reveals itself through stability. You notice that emotions rise and fall without dragging your identity with them. A difficult moment no longer becomes a verdict on your worth. A setback no longer feels like a personal failure. You experience events without becoming consumed by them. Stoic thinkers never promised happiness as an outcome. They promised freedom from unnecessary disturbance. Seneca made this distinction clear in Letters from Seneca, Letter 9, when he wrote that the wise person is content not because life is easy, but because they are sufficient unto themselves. This sufficiency is not arrogance. It is independence from emotional volatility. Inner sovereignty means you no longer outsource your peace to circumstances. Praise does not inflate you. Criticism does not collapse you. Uncertainty does not paralyze you. This does not mean you feel nothing. It means feelings no longer dictate your direction. They inform, then pass. There is also a new honesty that emerges. You stop pretending that control over externals is possible. In doing so, resentment fades. Blame loses its usefulness. Energy returns. You direct it toward effort, character, and clarity rather than resistance. Life feels demanding, but no longer hostile. This steadiness is durable. It does not depend on motivation or mood. It is maintained by a consistent respect for the boundaries you have learned to see. When those boundaries are honored, emotional chaos has nowhere to take hold. This is the reward Stoicism offers. Not escape from difficulty, but command within it. Not comfort, but composure. And once this composure becomes familiar, you realize it was always available, waiting only for judgment to reclaim its role. A calm, firm invitation. There is a choice that appears quietly once everything else has been understood. It does not announce itself as motivation or confidence. It presents itself as clarity. You realize that life will continue to unfold without consulting your preferences. Events will arrive uninvited. Outcomes will remain uncertain. Other people will act according to their own nature. None of this is new. What is new is how you meet it. Stoicism does not ask you to withdraw from life. It asks you to stop demanding that life obey you. That demand was the source of your tension. When it dissolves, something steadier takes its place. You stop asking circumstances to give you peace, and you stop blaming them when they do not. You recognize that peace was never theirs to give. Marcus Aurelius returned to this truth again and again, especially when power, responsibility, and uncertainty pressed heavily on him. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 2, Paragraph 1, he reminded himself that the day ahead would bring interference, ingratitude, and unpredictability, not as a complaint, but as preparation. He was not lowering expectations. He was aligning them with reality, so his mind would remain free. This is the invitation you are left with. Not to become indifferent, but to become precise, to place your effort where it can actually act, to guard your judgment more carefully than your comfort, to treat emotional reactions as signals to examine, not commands to follow. Nothing here promises that emotions will stop appearing. They will. Nothing promises certainty or ease. Those were never guaranteed. What is promised is something quieter and more reliable. The ability to remain intact when emotions surge. the ability to choose your response when life refuses to cooperate, the ability to stand within difficulty without surrendering your reason. This is not a dramatic transformation. It is a disciplined one. It shows itself in moments no one else sees, in pauses you take, in words you do not say, in reactions you no longer reward. Over time, these moments accumulate. They form a character that is difficult to disturb. You are not asked to believe anything blindly. You are asked to observe your own experience, to notice how suffering increases when control is demanded, and how it softens when judgment becomes deliberate. To test this, not in theory, but in the next difficult moment that arrives. The work is simple, but not easy, and it never ends. Each day offers the same opportunity: to hand authority back to emotion, or to keep it with reason, to fight reality, or to work within it. To live scattered, or to live governed from within, the choice is always yours. And once you see that clearly, you realize something essential. You were never powerless. You were simply standing in the wrong place, trying to control what could not be controlled. Step back into your rightful position. Guard your judgment. Accept what arrives. Act where you can. That is enough.